Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of the Ashley Williams Show. Y'all, this episode is one you don't want to miss. We're finally discussing therapy and mental health. It was going to be on black men specifically, but Dr. Vince, who y'all are going to hear from, just told me, it's universal. We're not calling people out. So I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Vince.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, you don't know how excited I am. So before we get into it, I want you to introduce yourself, but while you're doing so, we do a segment on the show called Lemons to Lemonade. So you share a story of where you've had to turn a trial into a triumph. Okay. And in that, throw your intro in.
Got it. So I'm Dr. Vince. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist here in Atlanta, and I have a private practice, Dr. Vince Psychological Services, where I am intentional about centering the mental health needs of black men. And so I like to say that I work with black men specifically, but not exclusively. So I'm open to work with anyone who thinks I'd be a good fit for them as a therapist, but I really am intentional in focusing on black men because there's so few spaces that are really specific to our mental health needs. Lemons to lemonade, I really would say the pandemic, because the pandemic is actually when I started my practice.
Really?
The pandemic for me, especially 2020 when things first got started, was really a time of thinking through intentionality around how I wanted to spend my time in terms of relationships, how I wanted to spend my time in terms of my career, and really evaluating whether or not I was doing what I was really passionate about and called to. And I realized during that time of kind of solitude that we were all experiencing that I wasn't really passionate necessarily about the work that I was doing. And I wanted to do something that I felt more autonomy around so I could do what I felt like I was called to do. And so that's when I started my private practice in November of 2020, and it kind of took off. So the pandemic was lemons, but
You
for
made
me,
lemonade.
I made lemonade.
Cheers.
Salud.
Salud. I love that. So, were you in therapy prior to the pandemic or just starting your private practice?
No, so I was working for another organization, and I still work for another organization full-time, but started my private practice part-time.
Okay, and what made you choose this field of work initially?
So initially, I wanted to be a medical doctor.
Oh.
And my grandmother always told me growing up that I was going to find the cure to cancer. Ooh. So, I mean, as if cancer is like one thing, but she always told me that, so I thought I was going to be a doctor. I went to Morehouse College for undergrad, took a biology class. I got a 30-something on my first test. Oof. I said, this is not for me.
At least you learned quickly.
Very quickly. It was the first semester. At the same time, I was taking a class, Psychology of the African American Experience. And so I fell in love with understanding the ways in which what we've learned about ourselves as black people in this country has really informed how we see ourselves. And the very negative things that often come with that affect how we engage with ourselves, how we engage with each other, and really the transformative power of psychology and therapy to help us unlearn all the harmful things that we've learned about ourselves. And so from there, I fell in love with the field and just went on to go to graduate school. I went to UCLA for graduate school, and then the rest was history.
Nice. Okay, quick pivot. How was LA? How many years was that?
So I was in grad school for 6 years. I was in LA for 5. Okay. The last year I was at Georgia State University for my internship. That's just where you do therapy for a full year, full time. I'm not a West Coast kind of guy. I'm more East Coast guy. I went to Morehouse for undergrad. I'm originally from Virginia. And so for me, LA wasn't really the vibe, but to each their own. But I was just there for school. I had a great experience at school.
I love that. Well-rounded views.
Absolutely.
So you said that you're very passionate about therapy in black men, and that's honestly why I wanted to have you on the show, because I think I'm grateful that mental health and being pro-therapy has become a conversation over the last few years, but I feel like it's been targeted towards women, and men get excluded from it. So what has been your experience? Do you find, and this show is specifically for millennials,
Sure.
So do you find that you have a millennial clientele, and if so, like, what are you hearing? Like, what are some of the common themes and challenges that people are going through?
So it's interesting that you have that perspective, because I think I have a bit of a different perspective. This could also be like how the algorithm feeds feeds what we see. Because I actually think, especially during the pandemic and since, there's been more and more conversation about black men's mental health. And so I think the blessing for me was that I tapped in during that time. And so actually for me, my private practice took off
Booming.
from the moment that I started it, because there was already this conversation being had in my experience, particularly geared toward Black men. That could also be the circles that I'm a part of, and so on. But yeah, I haven't had any issue getting clients. Most of my clients are millennials, even though it ranges. I have clients that are Gen Z. I have clients that are Gen X and older. But a lot of the issues that I see largely deal with relationship issues, anxiety, depression, and just general sort of self-esteem sorts of issues that brothers are dealing with.
And every situation is different, but for the latter piece, anxiety, depression, what do you say to people that may be their struggle and they're not seeing anyone? Like, how do you advise people who are going through those things to, live to fight another day?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I always like to make it clear to people, therapy is for everybody, but everybody is not ready for therapy. Because therapy can be a very hard process.
Ooh, child.
And there may be truths that you're not ready to talk about, things that you may not be ready to deal with, boxes of trauma that you may not be ready to open. And that's okay. And I like to normalize this idea that you need to go to therapy, Yeah, everybody can benefit from therapy, but everybody's not ready for it. So to answer your question, I always tell people it's important to do things that are therapeutic, even if you're not going to therapy.
That's good.
Because we can all do things that are healing practices. If we're dealing with anxiety, if we're dealing with depression, you don't have to go to therapy in order to do that, but find whatever your healthy coping strategies are, like brown liquor and smoking stuff. It's not, that may be in your toolbox, so we need to fill that toolbox with other things that are healthy. Oftentimes, particularly for a lot of the brothers that I work with, the issue is that brown liquor and smoking something is all that's in their toolbox.
Oh, that's good. So you suggest hobbies. What are some of those other things that are in the toolbox?
Yeah, so I like to talk with people about doing things that feed your mind, your body, and your soul. And so you identify whatever those things are. So spending time with friends, spending time with family, meditation, prayer, going to church if that's your thing, spending time in nature, just whatever those things are that feed your mind, feed your body, and feed your soul. Oftentimes those are the healing practices that we all need to do that can be therapeutic even if you're not going to therapy.
Yeah, and I like the language that you're using, because and this is me being transparent, I want to go to therapy and I want you to tell me what to do. And that's not what it is.
No,
you're
that's
coaching
not what it is at all.
me. Like, it's very much, you have to identify what these things are.
Yes. My role as a therapist is to help you figure out what's best for you. Because people come to me and they say, well, Vince, should I do this? Should I do that? No, I'm not gonna do that.
Vince said.
No, because you're not gonna get me in trouble, or you're not gonna leave here, break up with your partner, because I don't have to sleep alone at night. You do. So I'm not going to tell you to do that. But what I am going to do is to talk you through your decision making. And if you're going to make a decision, we're going to be very honest about what decision you're making and why. And even if you choose to make a decision that's unhealthy, let's be honest about that. And let's say, okay, I'm making this decision. I know this is not the best for me, and this is why I'm doing it. And then maybe at some point you'll get to a place where you're ready to make a healthier decision, and I'm going to be there with you in the unhealthy decision and the healthy decision. But it's not for me to tell you what to do.
This was for y'all. I feel like he's just coming for me. Jeez, let me breathe. No, this is good. I do need to be on somebody's couch is what I mean.
We all do. I do too.
Look at, I love that. So my therapist has a therapist.
Absolutely. I've been in therapy on and off for years. I think it's so important. And also, I think particularly as Black folks, as I was saying before, and this comes up for a lot of the brothers that I work with specifically, there's so many messages about, and I'll speak particularly about Black men, there's so many messages we get about who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to engage in the world that it limits us from experiencing the fullness of our humanity. And so that's really for all Black folks, but specifically I work with Black men. And so a lot of times they feel like they're not able to show up fully because the world doesn't allow them to show up fully. And that even applies to me as a Black man. And so for me, that's the work of therapy, is to create a space where people can learn how to show up fully in their full authenticity and unapologetically. And I need that too. So I'm not immune from the unhealthy messages that I get about what it's supposed to be a Black man in America.
That's good. I am on everybody on TikTok, but it feels like every time a man does something, there's a label that's put in the comments.
Absolutely.
They're this, they're that.
Absolutely.
And that, it could be just a video of them dancing, riding a bike down the street, and they're labeling them whatever, fill in the blank. Like, how, I feel like that speaks to what you're saying on like all of these expectations that are put on men.
Yeah.
And so how is black women, what are some of the things that we're doing that's negatively or adding to that impact, and how can we turn that around and support black men?
Okay, so I'm going to go to the first part and then come back to the second part. Oftentimes what happens when these little comments on TikTok and Instagram and these other podcasts and kind of social media conversations, what that does is that pushes black men to perform.
Ooh.
Because it adds to the script of what I can and cannot do. So if there's a video of, and this actually happened recently, it was a black father and his son, and the son looked like he was in his 20s or 30s, and he was literally laying on his father.
Yes.
You saw that too?
So healthy.
So healthy, so many terrible comments about it. Why? Because that's outside of the script of how black men are supposed to engage with each other. So if I'm seeing these negative comments, now I have a choice that either I'm going to perform your expectations, or I'm going to be free to do what I want to do and have to deal with the backlash. And so oftentimes we end up pushing black men into this performance so that they can fulfill the role that we as a society say this is what a black man is supposed to be, even though, again, that doesn't allow him to experience the fullness of his humanity.
That's good.
And so for black women, I think oftentimes they inadvertently, I don't think it's always intentional, encourage the performance.
How?
How? And so oftentimes, and this is coming from the brothers that I work with, their spouses, their mothers, the women in their lives tell them explicitly and implicitly how they're supposed to respond to situations. Uh-oh. Am I talking to you?
You in the room, Pastor.
And so when you do that, what you do is invalidate the reality of how this man is showing up. And you're telling him the only way that you can engage with me is if you engage with me based on my rules. And so you don't allow room for him to have his own needs, his own emotional needs, his own wants, his own desires. All you allow room for is your own. And if your own are not being fulfilled, then you withdraw, you shut down, you disengage, you get angry. And so oftentimes what that teaches men is that we're only able to engage in a relationship, whether it's romantic or otherwise, if I'm providing you what you need.
Woo, okay, let me rethink something. That was a lot, it was heavy. Because I always assume that men want to be providers.
We're told to be providers. That's the performance.
Wow.
And I'll complicate that a little further. I think there are a lot of men who do enjoy providing. Providing materially, providing emotionally, providing spiritually. The issue is that is often not reciprocated.
Right. I would agree.
So if I show up for you and I'm constantly providing for you and I enjoy doing that, that becomes part of my identity. After a while, if that's never reciprocated, I'm going to feel like you're just taking from me and not pouring into me in any way.
And so what are some examples of pouring in? Because I think that's where the disconnect is. I have lots of conversations where I'll talk to my female friends, the blind leading the blind. We'll get together, talk about what this man want and what he meant when he said that. And then you go talk to your male friends and they be like, where did you... So I think we're talking to each other about what you want and we don't know.
Right.
Because nobody would ask you.
Right.
So how do we navigate through that? Like, how do I come to know what it is that, or how a man wants to show up?
Well, I mean, the reality is there's 3-4 billion men in the world. And so oftentimes we have this conversation as if men are monolithic. And there's these books and podcasts and 10 tips to get a man, and as if men are all the same.
Yeah.
And so if you approach me based on whatever 10 list, and I'm not that kind of man, there's going to be a disconnect. But what you're going to say is that there's something wrong with me.
Show is, because why he texted me like that?
Right.
But I don't even know that man.
Right. Right. And so I think allowing men to express what their own needs are and what their own wants are, and just getting to know them individually, and not coming with all these expectations that because you're a man, X, Y, Z should be the case. Because it may be and it may not be.
Vince, I had all these great questions and now I'm like rethinking everything I said. This is good though, because like I think that's the point you're making, is we all come in with these expectations and assumptions of people as if they're the truth, and it's not, and we don't allow people the room, male or otherwise, to be honest, to show up as their full self.
Right.
And so I think as women, whatever your journey is in supporting Black men, sometimes we may just need to shut up and listen.
Absolutely, yeah. Listen, and also leave room for this person to show up in the fullness of their humanity. I'll give you an example of what it looks like. Oftentimes, this provider thing, for example, if I feel the pressure of having to be a provider, what happens when I no longer can provide?
Yeah.
Right? And so now I may feel insecure, I may feel inadequate, I may feel all these things that there's no space for me to be able to talk about. So now I may go to other sources to get those needs met, because I still have those needs. I still have the need to be validated, to be appreciated, but it's just not potentially happening in my primary relationship because I may not be able to show up in the way that the person is expecting. So instead of talking to you about it, because you're not giving me the space to talk to you about it, I'm going to go to somebody else and talk about it.
Because I'm nagging. I'm mad because what you ain't doing.
Right. And at no point have you ever asked me how I feel about being in the position that I'm in.
Ooh, and I think that comes from what you just said. Our assumption is that you're supposed to provide, meaning you're supposed to satisfy my emotional needs, and I haven't even considered the fact that you have those of your own. Right,
absolutely. Nor has there been space traditionally for men to even explore what their own needs are. So then what happens sometimes is that people will get upset with their male partner saying, well, he doesn't show up, he's not emotional, he's not romantic, but at no point did he ever learn how to do that. All he learned was he's supposed to provide, and provide materially, protect physically, and express anger or nothing at all. And that's the extent of what society has typically allowed us as men to do. And so oftentimes that's also the frustration, is that you're expecting things from someone who may not even know within themselves how to articulate what it is that they need.
But how do you give grace in that situation?
Oh, well, that would be for you to talk about with your own therapist. Because you got to figure out whether or not that's a journey you're even willing to go on. Because you may be willing and you also may not be willing.
And so, child, the ghetto. This is not what this is supposed to be. I want to be very clear. Okay. But the first one, which I think we talked about a little in this conversation, is the main thing one of the main challenges that they bring to you is dating, which is interesting to me because as a whole, do men want to date?
Oh my God, yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And they want loving, committed, honest, integral relationships. I think the issue is that we're living in this podcast, Instagram world where this minority of men, they have mics and kind of set the narrative, when in reality, again, there's 3-4 billion men in the world. There are so many Black men who I talk to every day who really want to be in committed, loving, healthy relationships. And they're doing the work.
Yeah, I got that shade. But where's the disconnect? So we got all of these men who desire to be in loving relationships and women who desire the same thing, and they're just completely missing each other?
Yes.
How?
Because I don't think we understand how to show up for each other.
That piece.
Because you can love somebody, but if I say I love you in Spanish and you say you love me in German, we love each other, but we don't know how to communicate with each other. We don't know how to show it to each other. So the love is not the issue. It's the way that we engage that's the issue. We're not understanding each other.
Oh, all of this is real basic. Reading is fundamental. Listening is fundamental. Where do we complicate it?
It's actually it's not basic because there's skills that we don't learn. Many of us don't grow up in households where we're given the space to name what our needs are and have that heard.
True.
All it is you're a child saying a child's place.
Yeah.
Do as I say, not as I do. Right? So a lot of these skills, these emotional skills, and how to show up for people, how to sit with our own discomfort, our own insecurity, our own jealousy, we don't learn how to do that. And so we show up in relationships not knowing how to do these things that you said are basic, but they're skills that we would never Nobody ever showed us. Nobody ever showed us for ourselves. Nobody ever modeled it for us in their own relationships. And so in many ways, we're repeating the unhealthy patterns that we grew up saying, I'm never going to be like that.
Oh, did you watch Love is Blind? Do you watch Love is Blind?
I didn't watch this season. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah,
no.
it's a lot. But Clay on there is like a walking example of what you were talking about. Like, he experienced trauma from his dad and the infidelity with his mom. And that's his personality type. And it's all, you almost got to feel sorry for him. But I'm like, that's why I asked you about that grace. Because at what point do you say, all right, I'm old enough to recognize that this could become a challenge for me. When am I going to change? And like, why? And I guess that's what you're saying. We're not expected to accept it. You cannot accept it.
Right,
like, you can
choice.
choose not to be.
That's a choice.
And I think we want to be involved because this person is available. They have the potential. So you say, oh, well, I'm going to stay here. But you're not saying I'm going to stay here. It could be friend or otherwise. And work with this person. You're just putting that expectation that they will change.
Right. And to go back to giving someone grace, if that person is putting in the effort and genuinely putting in the effort, that's when I would say, okay, we can give that individual some grace. If they're not putting in any effort, then you really have to consider, why are you staying in this connection if it's not serving you?
And I think in a lot of cases, men are honest. We just, again, don't listen. Like, very, very clear about intentions, where they are, what they need, if they have the language for it, and we just decide not to hear them out.
So I was actually having this conversation with a client earlier today. We fall in love with the fantasy. So we create this fantasy in our mind. Now we're married, we're on a yacht somewhere, we're taking Instagram pictures, and this other person has not agreed to this at all. But we've created this full fantasy. We're going to meet their family. We're going to do holidays together, matching pajamas.
Yes.
Right? Because we want the Instagram pictures with the dog and the kids. And we fall in love with that fantasy. And there's all these other red flags and indicators that fantasy is not going to happen with this person. But we zoom past those because our desire is to have the fantasy.
Oh, this is so necessary. I'm thinking I'm helping y'all. This is so necessary for women in particular. Because did you watch the Reese Tisa series?
I did.
And a lot of people were like on her case, and I'm like, that may not have happened to you in that magnitude.
Right.
But baby girl, you done been weak in the knees and ignored everything before.
Yes.
And she said something so like real. She just thought it was her turn. She wanted to be chosen. And I'm tired of the independent. I don't need a man. No, I do. I desire that, and that's okay to want to be chosen.
Absolutely.
But just like navigating it and not creating that fantasy.
Absolutely. And to speak to that situation, I've dealt with brothers that have been in similar situations.
Ooh,
so this is not that's what I was saying. Yeah, this is not specific to women, but oftentimes we only allow women to be victims. But I have clients who have been, who have experienced SA. I have clients who have been in physically abusive relationships. I've had clients who have been taken advantage of. I actually have some right now that I've been taken advantage of. So this is not one way, but oftentimes we don't allow black men to be victims. We make jokes about that, and we belittle it and invalidate it. And so there are a lot of brothers walking around who are in, maybe not to that magnitude, but those sorts of situations. There's just not space for them to be honest about it, so they suffer in silence.
I don't want y'all out here suffering.
Oh, baby, they're suffering. We are suffering. Yeah,
Tell somebody.
we're causing each other to suffer, actually, in many ways.
How?
Well, a lot of the things I've said, the expectations
like
that we put on each other, and now not allowing each other to exist in the fullness of who we are.
I'm like, this is not. I'm assuming everything you was gonna say. This is none of it, because I think the other piece is we're thinking we're fighting external factors. Our job, we're black, other races. No, we're creating issues of ourselves before we even get to talk about the other factors that are going on.
Well, let's complicate that a little further because
I need breadcrumbs. Complicated though, man. It's complicated.
Because I'm a systems level thinker, and so you're talking about capitalism, you talk about the job, you're talking about racism. A lot of the ways that we engage with each other is a result of all the other systems that are coming down on us. So it'd be so much easier to exist in the world and to be in a relationship if you didn't have to deal with racism, sexism, homophobia, capitalism. If you didn't have to deal with any of that, a lot of people want to be depressed, they want to be anxious, they'd be free, and it'd be easy to make connections with other people. It's much more difficult to be in relationship because relationship requires vulnerability, it requires emotional trust. And if you come from a group of people that hasn't felt safe to do that, you're not going to be able to do that with another person. Or it's going to be much more challenging for you to do that with another person. And so those very things that you mentioned, the job, racism, and all that, definitely affects how we engage with each other, romantically and otherwise.
Okay, so hearing all this, I could see me on the other side now and be like, oh my gosh, I'm stressed. That's a lot. What's the silver lining?
What's the silver lining?
Yeah.
Is that we're having this conversation. And that people are willing to stop and consider these things and reflect within themselves.
Y'all doing some reflecting over there on the other side of the camera. I am. It's really took me for a loop.
To add to that, one of the things that I say is that therapy is the process of unlearning. And so many of us need to unlearn the ways of being that we think are serving us, and it's really not. Whether it's in relationship, whether it's in how we think about ourselves, it's all about unlearning, because a lot of us are doing things that it's not serving us, but we don't have any other alternative. And so the idea of therapy is to let's talk through what it is that you're doing that's working for you, what it is that you're doing that's not, and what needs to change in order to live more of the life that you want to live. But the first step is to have these sorts of conversations and to reflect within yourself.
I need to do a lot of reflecting. I think another part of the conversation that is important to highlight, especially in the Black community, is the role that church plays in a lot of this, and religion. And so if you're someone who's struggling with, when do I pray about it and when do I go to therapy? I'm always going to call Jesus if that's your thing. But how do you find that balance if you've been taught to just call Jesus and that's it?
So I don't think there's anything wrong with doing both. And there are actually some therapists that will pray with you in session.
Wow.
Oh yeah, I've actually done that before with clients.
I've never heard of that. I've heard of like Christian therapists, but I didn't know it was to that extent.
Yeah, one time I had a client who asked, can we pray together? And I said, sure.
That's so good.
Because I want you to bring the fullness of who you are into this space. You don't have to leave Jesus at the door when you go to therapy.
Come on, Jesus.
Right. Actually, we need Jesus to come in the room.
Keep him in your heart.
And so, again, therapy is the process of unlearning. We have to unlearn that it's either religion or therapy. It can be both. And you pray about it, and maybe the answer is to go to therapy.
Look at God giving us tools. I like that.
And also in therapy, we talk about mindfulness practices. Mindfulness practices are things that get you out of your head, back into your body, back into the present moment. Meditation is a mindfulness practice. Prayer is also a mindfulness practice. And so we were talking before about creating that toolbox of different coping skills for depression and anxiety. Prayer can certainly be one of them. We're not in conflict with that.
Say it again, one more time.
We're not in conflict with that.
For the people in the back.
We're not in conflict with that.
Amen. That's so good. You're so good for the comment. Another one that we've not talked about is, we've talked about dating and relationships, could be friendships also, but family relationships when it comes to therapy. I've seen so much. Like, I had a really good familial experience with my grandparents and my mom and my stepdad. And then when I grew up, I was like, everybody mama ain't there for them.
Yeah.
Or everybody mama ain't a good one. Or father. So, like, what has been your experience as a we talked about unlearning some of those behaviors, but I've heard way more, and I still can't wrap my head around people going no contact with parents. And so, like, what has been your experience with those types of challenges?
Yeah, and so I think what you're getting at is how people learn to set healthy boundaries with family, particularly like abusive or harmful family members. And so for me in therapy, I never tell people, don't engage with this person, don't do this, don't do that. I help people to find what is the healthy boundary for you. And so if this person has been so harmful in your life that you need to not contact them, then do that. And let's figure out, is that temporary? Is that permanent? Is this a relationship that can serve you? And if this will never be a relationship that can serve you, then let's make a decision about how this relationship shows up in your life. Whether it's a family member, friends, there are no special rules just because we're related. Because a lot of people who are relatives are not family.
The Bible say honor thy mother and thy father, don't it?
Oh no, but I can honor you and not allow you to disrespect me.
Period.
Honoring you is not cussing you out when you deserve to be. I'm not going to do that, but I will hang up the phone.
We like that. A little respect in there. That's good. Another thing is in millennial life and navigating, like, you start to experience grief. And I define grief as any kind of loss.
Absolutely.
It don't have to be death. So,
Absolutely.
like, how do you navigate grief in this season? Plus all the other extra things you just piled up on top of me. It's complicated it.
How do you handle grief? Just in therapy?
Or just in general, while I'm doing all the things. I'm trying to date. I'm going to work. I'm trying to show up in all of my ships. But then I'm still dealing with grief. Any type of loss. Could be a relationship. Could be a death. Like, could be divorce for some people. Like, how do you navigate grief and life?
I think, for me, one of the things I do in therapy is talk about acceptance. And acceptance recognizes that there are going to be things in life that I don't like. They're uncomfortable. I wish they weren't the case. And I'm going to move forward knowing that this is what's happened. And I'm not going to get stuck in the sadness of what's happened.
Ooh, that's so good. Lemons to lemonade.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not to say that it's not going to hurt, because it is. That's not going to say that it's not going to be hard, because it is. Life is hard. And that's what we do in therapy too. We're going to be honest. We're going to sit in this and talk about, like, these are lemons. And we're not going to hide the fact that they're lemons. We're not going to act like they taste good, because they don't. We need to be very honest about that.
That's good.
And then we say, okay, now that we honor the difficulty of dealing with these lemons, let's move forward and figure out how we can turn this into some lemonade.
There's always another way, and not to get caught up
Not to get stuck.
in this current situation.
Absolutely.
Okay, so grief, we talked about family. Anything else that you see that's important to bring to this conversation?
I think in general, talking about black men and black women, I think, again, in the social media space, a lot of black women don't realize, and this is beyond just romantic relationships, how many black men that there actually are that are on their side. I think, again, the podcast bros get mics and set the narrative, where I talk to brothers every day who identify as feminists, who read bell hooks and James Baldwin. And this is beyond, like, sexuality and all those different sorts of things. These are brothers who are really committed to black liberation for all black people. And that includes black women. And I think oftentimes those brothers don't get to set the narrative. And I think that leaves black women thinking that we're against them. And there are so many of us that are not.
Yeah. And what I just thought about as you said that is, for whatever reason, I brought up earlier, you say they there, I believe you. I take you at your word. How do we keep missing each other? I think as women, you can recognize a trait, but because that's the only trait that you've seen, that's the trait you decide to continue to identify with. And you don't go into other spaces to see, like, it's cool over here. I want to hang out with these people who actually support me, as opposed to, I know what they're saying about me and I'm still going to opt in.
Absolutely. And when you were saying that, what came up for me, this may be silly, but Sierra and Russell Wilson.
Let that man love his wife.
Like, a lot of Sierras out there are sticking with Future, unhappy with Future, but because Future is familiar, they stand with Future, when really it's Russell Wilson over here that may be totally different from anything that you've expected, what you've been looking for, but is going to show up for you in the way that you want.
And I think that goes back to expectations of what a man should look like and what they should embody. He may be corny, and that's okay. Because what is corny?
Right.
And who cares?
Right. Because to me, it's corny not to take care of your children.
Ooh, and ooh. What do you say to... See, that's another thing. We've been talking about black men, but I think there are black women who have situations that are not socially acceptable, so they opt out of all types of ships,
Sure.
whatever it is. So
Sure.
like single women of a certain age, single mothers. Like, how do you encourage all of these groups that they're not traditionally accepted or taught to look at differently because it's not the picture perfect, whoever says what picture perfect is?
You mean they're taught in terms of relationships? Not
Or just in life, like they feel like they get the shorter end of the stick. I'm a widowed woman, or I'm single and I'm 40,
I see.
or I'm a quote unquote baby mama.
And so I think a lot of this goes back to unlearning, because what those people are doing is associating certain value within themselves based on their circumstances. And so I may have lesser value because XYZ. When in reality you don't. But then you go around engaging in the world as if that's
As if
true.
You do, and nobody said that to you.
Right.
You're good. So the other piece that you just mentioned, value, on the same topic of women, because this is something that the podcast bros talk about a lot. But I've also heard men who support women say things differently. Like, a woman, especially like millennial, puts so much weight into their career.
Sure.
And then your career becomes your identity. Like, I had to get out of there. Like,
Yeah, me too. I'm still working on it.
It's hard.
It's very hard.
And so when you hear, because you'll hear guys say, not that they're not saying, I don't appreciate what you do, I don't admire that, or I don't respect you for that, but that is not how I find value in you. And so what a woman hears is, well, I done did all this and I done worked hard and you don't care. Like, what are you saying? So how do you explain that? I don't know if dichotomy is the right word.
Yeah, so I think what you're getting at is the values that men sometimes bring to the table are different from the values that women think men want.
Yes.
And so again, this goes back to just having, like, limiting our own expectations and being open for people to bring things to the table that are different from what we thought to be true. Because oftentimes we limit ourselves, Future and Russell Wilson, because we think certain things have to be true. But in reality, I may not care if you cook, clean, I may not care any of that. I want you to be honest. And I want you to have integrity. And I want you to leave room for me to also have emotions in this relationship. If you make 6 figures a year, that is great. That is not necessary. Because at the end of the day, that's not going to necessarily lend itself to happiness. You being honest, open, integral, those sorts of things, spiritual, those sorts of things will lend itself to happiness.
And I think you have to be open to seeing the value in yourself outside of these things that aren't it. Like, yeah, the fact that you make 6 figures or you have XYZ career is a part of you, but that's
Sure.
not who you are.
That's not definitive of your value as a person, right?
And when you think people don't recognize that, it's a knock to you.
Right.
Which it isn't.
But then you also, because you end up minimizing your own value because you're only seeing yourself as valuable based on these external things that you do. This often happens with brothers as well, where they feel like they're only valuable based on what they quote unquote bring to the table. So the kind of car they have, the kind of money that they make, the kind of job that they have, if they don't check a certain list, then they have no value. So what ends up happening is I'm going to put all my energy into having a good career, good car, making a lot of money, because that's what I think other people see as valuable. But then I miss actually working on myself as an individual, because that's really where the value lies, but oftentimes society doesn't see it that way.
So if we're going to eliminate that question, because I hate it, because I don't think that's what people are asking. If we're going to say you can no longer say, what do you bring to the table? What's the better question?
What do you value?
Do you know how quickly you would get to a resolution if you ask that instead? Okay, y'all, that's the question. What do you value?
Because what do you bring to the table is essentially me asking you, why should I be sitting here with you?
Right.
When in reality,
I'm already irritated.
Right, yeah, I mean, that's not going to get us anywhere. When in reality, what I want to know is, are we aligned in our values? Is family important to you, or is your career important to you? Not that there's anything wrong with either, but I just need to know. Is spirituality important to you or not? Those are values, right? Is quality time important to you? Is integrity and honesty important to you? I'm not going to get that if I just ask you what you bring to the table, because then you're just going to list a bunch of material things that says nothing about who you are as a person.
And And what do you say to like the argument of, well, I'm not gonna say it because that's just gonna give you the roadmap of how to pretend to treat me. Like if I tell you I want you to be honest and respectful and plan beautiful dates, and you go and do all those things, but that's not genuinely who you are as a person. You're just trying to woo somebody.
So it's better not to tell them and to have them guess and to still fail?
I don't know. I don't know that. I don't got the answers. Like, I'm out here in the street.
Because I think that's the alternative. The alternative is, okay, you're not going to tell me, so essentially you're making this a guessing game, which to me says you're not good at communication, right? You're not clear about your intentions and what you want, and you're putting me on trial. And so I'm going to do the best that I can if I'm interested to figure that out. But inevitably, I'm probably going to fail because it would have been easier if you would have just told me and given me the opportunity to show you that I can show up the way that you want me to. Why is it that you're so skeptical that if I show up the way that you want me to, that that's not true? What happened in your life to make you think that somebody actually meeting your needs must be false? Which to me says a lot more about the person than it does about the man who's trying.
Again, that's not what you out here for. We done been through some things, bitch. That's why we got trauma, PTSD.
Absolutely. And I think that shows up in our relationships when in reality we need to reflect and say, okay, I have a lot of trauma. There's some stuff that I need to figure out within myself before I even come to the table with you. Because actually my trauma is what I bring to the table.
No nonsense. That's so real. And maybe that's the piece that doesn't get talked about. We here arguing with each other about what we think. No, you think that because you have things that you have not dealt with.
Right.
And maybe the people that are having real healthy experiences are not chiming in. So it just seems like everybody is coming from, let's clean social media. Let's get some good vibes out there. You mentioned another thing, and as I think about Trey, black men as the new fathers, and I've seen so many positive things on social media of black men showing up as fathers, and that's healing for me and being therapeutic. So, what is your experience with millennials becoming fathers, and has there been a natural challenge or natural transition for people, or are there other challenges that could be talked about when you think about men becoming fathers?
So again, this goes back to the unlearning, because there was some research, it's probably old at this point, maybe about 5 to 10 years ago, that came out that actually showed that black fathers are actually more involved in their children's lives than men of other racial groups.
I think I heard that.
The issue is that the narrative out there is that we're just absent. Now, are there absent black fathers? Sure, and we know them. I think the fathers that are showing up don't get any credit.
Like we just spoke about.
Right. Because that's not new to me. I know plenty of black men who show. I was raised by a black man who showed up, and I was in a community of black men who were showing up, and so that's not necessarily new. But if it hasn't been your experience, then it may be new. But it's definitely not the narrative that's out there.
You just said something. My mom likes to remind me: stop taking on the trauma of other people. And so sometimes we have these warped perspectives that we didn't see. It's just what's being promoted.
Sure.
So you attach to that instead of recognizing what you know to be true.
And I'll tell you this as well. A lot of the brothers that I work with, there is a pain that comes from having an absent parent regardless of who it is. But there's a different kind of pain that comes from having a physically present parent who is still emotionally absent. And many of us grew up in that situation, even if it was a single parent. They were physically present, but emotionally completely absent. So we're still dealing with pain of absence.
Grief, y'all.
Absolutely.
We be grieving.
And then it shows up in how we engage in relationships.
This was good. 3 things, if you had to leave the people with, what are your 3 things? And it could be on the topic or otherwise.
3 things. I would say that therapy is for everybody, but everybody's not ready for therapy. So even if you're not ready for therapy, do something that's therapeutic to you. I would also say I'm really big on freedom. And so take the time to identify what freedom means to you. and do the things that align with that freedom. And then also to Black women, there are so many Black men that are on your side. We are out here in numbers.
I love us, y'all.
Yeah, everybody is not on the podcast bros side. I mean, there are a lot of us who really advocate for and stand 10 toes down for Black women and advocating and see them as equals in the fight for Black liberation.
That's good. I really do appreciate you. Like I told you before we got started that authenticity and transparency is important to me, and I for sure came on thinking I knew exactly what you was gonna say to every answer. But yeah, I'm nobody perfect. I'm just a platform to share voices, and so I'm the first to say that I truly gained something from this conversation.
Thank you.
I hope that it comes across on camera and that our viewers do too. If people want to reach out to you, how do they do that? And we'll add the information as well. But
yeah, so you can check out my website. It's www.thedrvince.com, THEDRVINCE.com. You can also check me out on Facebook and Instagram at the same handle.
I love that. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Let's do it.
Complicate things.
Let's complicate things some more. Let's do it.
Well, thank y'all for tuning in to another episode of the Ashleigh Williams Show. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see y'all next week. Whoo! You read me for Phil.